This morning, I am going to be reading from the book of Proverbs. And before I get started, I wanted to say a word about Proverbs. Proverbs is a conversation that a father is having with his son. And it is really about trying to teach his son how it is that he will live a good life, or how his life will be full and abundant if he makes the right choices and does the right things. And so this morning, I'm going to read just a small portion of that out of chapter 9. And know that as I get ready to give my message, I'm going to be reading this morning out of the New Revised Standard Version, but I'm going to be referencing the text out of the Message version, which is why I happen to have two Bibles on the table this morning, because I'm going to be using both versions this morning as I preach. And so, just so you know, there's no confusion, I am still reading the same text as I move back and forth from this version to the Message Bible. Listen now to a word from the Lord. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her animals. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servant girls. She calls from the highest places in town. You that are simple, turn in here. To those without sense, she says, come, eat my bread and drink the wine I have mixed. Lay aside immaturity and live and walk in the way of insight. The foolish woman is loud. She is ignorant and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the high places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. You who are simple, turn in here. And to those without sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But they do not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Over the years, I have had mentoring, coaching, been given advice by a number of people. Most of it has been really good and really helpful to me. Now, like many of you in this room, those first people that gave me advice or mentoring were my parents and my grandparents. And their words were really not just about living a good life or growing up well, but it had to do with my ability to make really good choices. Because they understood early on, like many of your parents and grandparents, that good choices and a good life went hand in hand. Their collective wisdom not only helped me to know right from wrong, and not only helped me to make good choices, but I learned pretty quickly that when I made a bad choice, the consequences not only affected me, but they affected the people around me as well. After I left home and started going to school, like everybody goes to school, I also learned that education and learning about the right and wrong choices in life didn't only happen at home and in the classroom, but they happened on the playground, and they happened in the store, and they happened in our church. So any place I went, I had this collective wisdom, this wisdom that could help me learn what it meant to live and move and have my being in the community I was being raised in. The lessons that I learned there were really unique to that time and place, but they were really universal in nature. And they could cross ethnic lines. And together, not only did I learn what it meant to live a good life, but so did everybody around me. We all had the same opportunities to make good choices. In the book of Proverbs, this father is also trying to tell his son and his children what it means to live a good life. And in Proverbs, we learn that not only are the lessons good for daily living in their community, but it's good for daily living in the house of God. You see, the decisions and the choices that were made were not only made for the good of the community, but they were made for the good of God's community, this community that God had called out and separated from everyone else so that they might grow in wisdom and grace, that they might learn that a good life happens not only at home, And not only with the people you know, but a good life happens wherever you are if you're following the will and the way of God, if you're living a wise life and not a foolish life. And many of us have heard those little one-liners, and Proverbs is full of great one-liners. You know, the early bird gets the worm, and a stitch in time saves 9. The very first proverb I learned when I moved to Texas from New York was, always drink upstream from the herd. Now, you don't have to be a cowboy to understand the wisdom of drinking upstream from the herd. And while that is really good common sense, the book of Proverbs not only gives us really good common sense and a way to do life, but it also teaches us that if we live and move in God's will and God's way, our life will be much better. When we lay our head on our pillow at night, we will in fact be able to sleep well. In this particular chapter, the father is explaining to a child that there are 2 houses that ultimately they will have to choose to live in, that all children will have to choose at some point to live in, especially when they leave home. We start with the house of wisdom, and her message is pretty clear from the house of wisdom. And she says this to the person that is passing by. Are you confused about life? Don't know what's going on? Come with me, oh come and have dinner with me. The invitation that goes out to the student or the young person passing by your home is a beautiful invitation. Come into my home, my door is open, everyone is invited to eat at my table. And while that sounds like a great invitation, the first part of that is this: are you confused about life? In the NRSV it says, do you lack judgment? Well, who wants to admit that they're confused, and who wants to say that they lack judgment? Nobody I know wants to do that. And so the invitation is not a great invitation, right? Because that means that we have to say that we don't know all the things we think we know. Proverbs 3:7 tells us that we should never be wise in our own eyes. But isn't that the life that we're told to live? That we should have all the answers, that we should never make a mistake, that everything that we say and do is wise. Our social, our political, our moral problems today all come out of this idea that we have all the answers and that we know everything. When in fact, unless you have walked a mile in another person's shoes, you really have no idea most of the time about what you're talking about. Because wisdom is not merely book knowledge. Wisdom is real knowledge about the way of life that you have lived and others have lived. So until you have walked a mile in the shoes of a mother who cannot feed her children, you really have no business talking about some of the decisions those people will make in their lives when it comes to feeding their children. Until you have walked a mile in an immigrant's shoes, you have no real idea of what it's like to cross the border in the dark at night with your children, worrying about whether you will live or die as you make that trek. There are so many decisions that we make day to day about one another, and yet we don't really know what it's like to live as those people live. So there it is. To enter the house of wisdom means that we have to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we don't know everything, that perhaps there are a few things that we still need to learn. And I think that is the most difficult part of this invitation. Because who wants to really change something that they've clung to for so long, a way of thinking or a way of living, that they have deemed right and good all their lives? Wisdom requires humility, an admission that we don't have all the answers. And then it perhaps even requires a change of heart and a change of mind. And the feast is set so that we might grow in grace and truth as we enter that home. And I think the problem with that also, and probably even the more difficult problem with that, is that there's this competing voice. There's another voice. There's another invitation. And if you didn't catch it in the NRSV, then maybe you'll catch it here, because it's the same exact invitation. Are you confused about life? Don't know what's going on? Steal off with me, and I'll show you a good time. Well, that's the invitation from folly. That's the invitation of foolishness. Same invitation. Her door is open. Her table is set. She's calling us. Come into my house. It is a great place. I'll show you a great time. And the problem with that invitation is that if you lack judgment and you don't know everything there is to know, her home looks even better than wisdom's home. Because really what it means is that you don't have to take responsibility for anything in her home. It's the home of quick fixes and easy money, fuzzy ethics, no accountability. The House of Folly is like that new TV show called The Internet Ruined My Life. I was amazed that there was even a TV show like that. And so I had to watch one episode online just to get a feel for what that was all about. Well, what I learned in that show is somehow the people that hit send when they have posted a picture or snapped or tweeted something have decided that really they didn't do anything to ruin their own lives. The internet ruined their lives. See, in the House of Folly, you don't have to take responsibility for anything you do. It's always somebody else's fault. So consider that the picture that you have sent and the tweet that you have sent and the snap that you have just sent will follow you for the rest of your life. And at some point, that 10-second snap that was saved as a screenshot on someone else's phone that is being sent all over the world, even as you are sitting in your living room after you have sent it, will show up again in the college admissions office when they search your name. Or that thing that you said about the teacher or your parent or your supposedly best friend will show up in the human resources office one day as you are applying for the job. Momentary satisfaction, a snap judgment, and the full and abundant life that God has promised for us, gone. This is the table that folly sets. This is the door that is open for you. Is that moment worth the full and abundant life that God has promised to the people who enter the house of wisdom? That's what this father is trying to show his young child. We always have choices. We always have a choice about which door we will enter. Now, certainly we know that folly sometimes wins the day. And we see it advertised on billboards and on TV commercials and made for TV movies. And oh my gosh, how about the political debates? Folly is all over the TV. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that what lives in the house of folly and what we don't see are the skeletons in her closet, as the Message version will say, and that all the people who enter her home end up in hell, even while they yet live. It is not the home that we should choose, but the choice is always up to us. And you don't have to be in confirmation to make those kinds of good and bad choices, because every single one of us in this room has the ability to make good and bad choices, to enter into the home of folly or to enter into the home of wisdom. There are days where we will wonder how we have made the mess that we have made, and how in the world are we going to get out of there. And wisdom tells us that the only way out is to live in the presence of a holy God. And while that might not be easy, it is certainly doable. Because even as we have entered the house of folly, God's hands of grace are still open, waiting for us to come home. So I guess the only question then is, which house will you choose to live in? If you choose to live in the house of folly, you will become more and more self-centered, and your life will become about self-satisfaction. If you choose to live in the house of wisdom, your life will become more and more God-centered and outwardly focused. You will become less self-indulgent, and you will start to live your life more for others. You will learn what it means to grow in the grace and truth of Jesus Christ. If you choose to live in the house of folly, it might be hard to sleep at night. The food might start to taste spoiled and old. But if you live in the house of wisdom, I promise you that the water will be clean, because you will not be drinking downstream from the herd. You will always be drinking upstream from the herd. May your choice be wise.